We've all had bad conversations. They are part of life. But if your characters are having bad conversations, that could be a serious drain on your novel. Nothing stands out in a novel quite like bad dialogue, unless one of your characters has a sore thumb. Or I suppose if the character is having a conversation about how they have a... Today, we're going to talk about 5 types of dialogue exchanges that need a good talking to. These are conversations that could seriously harm your novel if they aren't dealt with, so they merit some careful consideration. Conversation that we should have a conversation about: number 1, the one-sided dialogue exchange. If one character is spewing out all kinds of stuff and the other character is just responding with 1 or 2 words and their responses are only happening so that the other character isn't just reciting a monologue, then that's a problem. There are legitimate reasons to have unequal contributions in a dialogue exchange. One character might be more reticent by nature, they might be angry at the other character and trying to freeze them out. The other character might just be a blabbermouth who monopolizes the conversation. But if you're just disguising an info dump in a dialogue exchange, or if the other character is just reacting to what's being said without adding anything in or affecting the conversation in any way, then that can be problematic. The most recent novel that I stopped reading partway through did this a lot in the dialogue, where a character would say something that was somewhat provocative, and then the other character would just react with "what?" And that was how a lot of the dialogue exchanges were written. Character says something expository and kind of provocative, other character reacts incredulously, repeat, 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 so on and so on. All characters should get something from a dialogue exchange. They should all contribute something to that exchange. Your dialogue should not just be a monologue in disguise. Even if one character is giving a bunch of information to another character, the character who's getting that information should be responding in some way. They should be asking questions or contributing their own information. What the other character says should be affecting the flow of the conversation. It should be changing directions based on what they're contributing to it. Next up, the plotless dialogue. One thing I've been trying to do lately is make every dialogue exchange have its own sort of plot. You start out, establish some kind of conflict in the conversation, you give each character a goal, you give them some sort of stakes that they stand to lose or gain through this conversation. As the conversation goes on, you raise the tension until there's some sort of resolution and then maybe a bit of a denouement. Obviously, for short exchanges, this doesn't work. But if you have a scene or a chapter that is just a big conversation, then it should probably follow this kind of structure. The reader will get lost or bored if there's no point to a dialogue exchange, if it doesn't feel like the characters are trying to accomplish something with the conversation, if there's no sense of progress. Not every conversation needs to have massive revelations that shake the world, but there should be some tension, some kind of forward movement. Introducing some conflict in your dialogue exchange is a good way to do this. Both characters don't need to be on the same page about what's being discussed. There's a lot you can play with here around subtext or having characters try to get different things out of a conversation. An interrogation scene where a detective is trying to get a confession from a suspect, and the suspect just keeps bringing up corruption within the police department, is an example of this kind of thing in action. You have 2 characters with different goals for the conversation. You have some natural conflict because one character doesn't want to reveal the information that the other character wants to get out of them. Instead of the exchange just being about dumping a bunch of information for the reader, the characters are actually saying specific things and taking specific actions to try to further their goals. It leads to a much more interesting conversation. Bad type of dialogue exchange number 3, the repetitive exchange. This happens when you have a character repeat something in dialogue that's been described in the narrative already. If you say something in the narrative and then have that repeated in the dialogue, then that's a problem. The narrative should not say the same thing that the dialogue has already said. John watched as Bobby bled from the bullet wounds in his chest. The injuries were serious. Bobby would need to get to a hospital immediately. "You're bleeding from the wounds in your chest," John said, helping his injured friend to his feet. "Let me help you to your feet, friend. Those injuries are serious. We need to get you to a hospital immediately." There's a lot of redundant information in that exchange, stuff that's said in the narrative that's also being repeated in the dialogue. Conveying something in dialogue alone is fine. Conveying something in narrative is also fine. You can use dialogue to either convey new information or enhance the information that's been provided already. If a character realizes something and you relate that realization through narrative, then you also don't have to have them state it in dialogue. In the example I gave before, when John realizes through narrative that the wounds are serious and he needs to get Bobby to the hospital, he can just say that through dialogue and the reader will understand. Now, there's an exception to this, and it has to do with subtext. Subtext is when what's said in the dialogue doesn't line up with what's said in the narrative. This is a case where you can have some repetition, but it's not really repetition because the narrative and the dialogue are saying different things. So an example of this, if John realizes that the wounds are serious, but he doesn't want to upset Bobby, he can realize that the wounds are serious through narrative, but his dialogue can downplay the seriousness of the wounds because he's trying to keep his friend calm. That's an example of subtext where the dialogue isn't necessarily relating what the narrative is relating. That's kind of a different example of that and kind of not something that we're going to talk about in this video. Bad kind of dialogue exchange number 4, maid and butler dialogue. This is different from maid in butler dialogue, which is something you only encounter if you're writing erotica. Basically, this is any expository dialogue that relates information that the two characters exchanging the dialogue would already be aware of. But the reader isn't aware of it, so it has to be related to them through dialogue. "As you know, the master is away this weekend," the butler said. "Yes, and as you know, someone will have to approve the dinner menus in his absence," the maid replied. This dialogue is fundamentally unnatural, as people don't normally reshare information that they already know. You can also get into one-sided exchanges with maid and butler dialogue quite easily if you just have one character who's relating a bunch of information to another character that character already knows for the reader's benefit. Introducing conflict around the information that you need to exposit can help alleviate this, because there are a lot of times where you do have information that you need to exposit, and it's often better to do that through dialogue in some way than it is to just exposit it through narrative. "It is nearly 7 and the dinner menus have not been approved," the maid said as she paced the dining room, hands clenched. "Someone will need to approve it in the master's absence," the butler replied, head bowed, eyes downcast. "And they will have to do it all weekend," the maid said, eyes growing wide. That's still not an amazing exchange, and it could probably be improved. But with the introduction of conflict, it's much better than having the two characters just relate something that they both already know in a flat way. The added emotion to the scene will help move this beyond just expository information. If the characters are upset about the situation, it might make more sense that they would talk about things that they both already know if they're worried about it and they want to solve the problem in some way. And the last type of conversation that we need to have a conversation about, the all there exchange. There's a writing axiom that says that you should enter scenes late and leave them early. And this applies to dialogue exchanges as well. Some people write scenes that show the character entering the room, meeting the other character, greeting the other character, then they have the conversation with the character, the conversation ends, and then they say goodbye to the other character and walk out of the room. I've critiqued novels like this where every single scene shows the beginning of the conversation and the end of the conversation, including having characters enter the room where the other character is or having them encounter the other character, and then also saying goodbye to the character and leaving the character and going on their way. This adds a lot of fluff and unnecessary movement and just kind of bloats scenes in a way that they don't really need. You can come in mid-conversation, that's the entering scenes late thing. And you can also leave mid-conversation so long as it accomplishes what you need to accomplish out of that conversation. Yes, you need to get the reader properly funneled into the scene and all of that, but we don't need to necessarily see the hellos and the goodbyes all of the time. It is possible a lot of the time to enter mid-conversation and leave before the conversation is over. This is especially true for the ends of conversations. You can end a conversation on a big revelation, or if like a character is getting instructions, you can end once the instructions are passed to them. I would say it's more common to leave a conversation earlier before it's necessarily over than it is to join mid-conversation, but joining mid-conversation is still something that you can do. Think about it, if it works, if you can avoid showing the build up to the conversation and the characters like initially greeting themselves, each other, and that sort of thing. Speaking of leaving conversations early, we're gonna leave this conversation now because this video is over. So I guess we're not technically leaving it early. Anyway, if you have anything to say about the video, about things your characters are saying, please leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching. Remember to check out all my other writing advice related videos, and I will see you next time.